Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders. This is the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Celeste Warren. She is the Vice President of Global Diversity and Inclusion Center of Excellence. She is the leader for Merck's Global Diversity and Inclusion Center of Excellence and is responsible for working with the global leaders to advance and embed diversity and inclusion best practices throughout the organization. Celeste has been honored with many top awards, including the Black Enterprise's Top Execs in Global Diversity and Inclusion, Savoy Magazine's Most Influential Women in Corporate America, Women E-News's 21 Leaders for the 21st Century, as well as Diversity's Global Magazine's Influential Women in Global Diversity. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. Celeste, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Leila. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today. And I wonder, because I know I did only touch on some of the accolades and some of the pieces that you are doing at present, but I wonder for those of our audience who perhaps don't know you as well, could you tell us a little bit about how you came to be where you are today at the helm of one of the most well-known global organizations in the world, and also doing a number of the, wearing a number of the multiple hats, I should say, for other boards that you sit on and other pieces that you champion when it comes to diversity, inclusion, belonging and equity?
Well, I like to say that I really started doing this job as a young child. My father, we're from a small steel mill town in Western Pennsylvania on the East Coast. And he was the first Black teacher, first Black principal in that region, not just of the state, but that region. And so I grew up seeing him in different situations where he had to fight for what he needed. He had to really be assertive around what he needed, but he did it on a foundation of dignity and respect for the person he was speaking with. He never raised his voice. He never treated someone with disrespect, but he was able to make an impact and change lives. And so watching him and then watching my mother supporting him as he went through his journey in his life and his challenges and successes, it really helped, I think, to prepare me for this role, which I didn't get until decades later. But after school, I joined another company, a food company, consumer products company, and I had a career in human resources for all of these years, and did this body of work, and always did it through a lens of diversity and inclusion. So I could never separate the fact that I was doing work in the people space, but I knew I needed to do it through a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that has always been at the forefront, has been my filter through the roles that I've had. And I supported, various different organizations it was the Philip Morris companies on the craft and general food side. And then when I came to Merck, supported the different divisions across manufacturing, research, and the commercial sales and marketing organization. So it's been a very, very interesting career, but a funny story. When I was first asked to take on this role, I was very, very hesitant because this is something that I'm very passionate about. And if someone is going to ask me to do this and take it on, as the company's leader in diversity and inclusion, I had to make sure that the people who were asking me were as serious about it as I was. And so my leader at the time, Miriam Braddock-Weir, who was the chief HR officer of the company, she asked me to take on the role. And I was sitting in her office and I was kind of hesitant. And she said, Celeste, she goes, Ken wants you to take the role, Ken Frazier, our CEO. he wants you to take the role, and you really should talk to him. And I said, okay, well, I'm thinking I'll set up a meeting in a week or two and he'll talk to me. And she said, okay. She took me over to his office right during at that time. And I sat down and I talked with him. And he is such an inspirational leader. And he basically said, Celeste, you are the person to do this role. The time is now. We need to make an impact and we need to make change. And so I took on the role at that point and have never looked back ever since.
That is such a brilliant story. And I love the fact that you say your CEO was inspirational and that the organization are genuinely taking this seriously, because the time absolutely is now. Over the last many months that we have seen everything from the absolute horrible tragic death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many more, through to Asian hate crimes, through to what is happening on our very own doorsteps when it comes to everything from social mobility and beyond. It is absolutely critical that we do not lose some of these real, I want to say some of these real global issues, but they are so much more than that, that we do not lose the momentum from some of the momentous things that have happened in our recent history. So it makes me very, very happy to hear that you accepted, obviously, and decided to steer the ship forwards and make real change in your organization and beyond, because this is a personal subject. You mentioned since you were a young child, this is something that was important. Perhaps, as a youngster, you didn't even know what diversity, inclusion, and belonging meant, but it's clearly in your blood, it's in your DNA to make an impact in the world. And talk to us a little bit more about some of the current work that you're doing. Obviously being recognized for multiple accolades, which is just so... It makes me so happy to see deserving, hardworking people being recognized for the hard work and for the success that they are achieving because of what they're doing professionally. Talk to me a little bit about some of the other work.
Well, it's really, really exciting. When I got into the role, I really wanted to make sure that we were going to make a difference, make an impact. And so that involved listening, first going out and assessing the organization, seeing where we were from the standpoint of our maturity when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And so we did that body of work, but where we are now, we are looking at it much more holistically. And so there are 4 areas that we're looking at. And so from a pharmaceutical company, from that perspective, our patients are very, very diverse. We have diverse patients all around the globe. And if we aren't able to meet their needs and make sure that when they take our medicines, when they take our vaccines, that they are experiencing the health outcomes that we want them to, we have to know what some of the barriers are, what some of those obstacles are to them being able to experience the ultimate health outcomes. And so in order to do that, we have to have employees who represent the diversity of our patients in the various different communities. And so we want to make sure that our employees mirror the patient base. We have to have that diversity, because you can't have a homogenous group of people sitting around interpreting what they think some of the issues are in certain patient communities. And so our framework around diversity and inclusion is in 4 areas. The first, very fundamentally, is to make sure we have a diverse population of employees. That's first. And that includes, looking at our representation across all of the dimensions of diversity. That is crucial. That's fundamental. The second is we want to make sure that we have an inclusive culture around those diverse employees. It's not enough to just have diverse employees and be counting them. But you have to make sure that you're leveraging that diversity. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that you have an inclusive environment around the employees. That involves a lot of different things, but you want to make sure that, very importantly, your leaders and your managers are demonstrating inclusive behaviors and leading in a way that allows people to feel that they're safe, their psychological safety, they have an ability to speak up, they have an ability to bring their authentic selves to work. The third piece is to make sure that at that intersection of diversity and inclusion and business performance, that we are creating a competitive advantage for the organization. And that's making sure that we're looking at our business practices through a lens of diversity and inclusion. So for example, in our business, we want to make sure that our marketing strategies are meeting patients where they are and that it's relevant to the local market. So multicultural marketing strategies, for example. We want to make sure that our clinical trials that has diverse patients in them. So when people are asking, well, does this medicine work for me? Well, how do I know? We can say that, well, we had diverse patients who look like you, who went through our clinical trials, and here's what the results were. So those are just some examples of making sure that we're doing it through a lens of diversity and inclusion. And then lastly, it's not enough that we are looking inside our four walls and making sure that we're doing what we need to be doing there, but we have a responsibility and an obligation to look outside of our four walls of the company and look to our other sister and brother companies and say, what are you doing? What can we learn from? And then here's some of the things that we can share with you, because we all have an obligation as companies to lock arms and really just raise the external environment, the culture, and the business landscape. That is an obligation that I feel that we have as companies. And so those are that's the framework that we operate on when it comes to diversity and inclusion within the organization.
It's wonderful that you are being, as you put it, so holistic about this subject matter. I absolutely concur. Not only is this absolutely fundamentally the right thing on so many different levels to do, but it is a strategic business priority to the nth degree. It's, as you say, it is the inclusive culture, it's the multifaceted dimensions, it's the psychological safety, it's the intersect with the deeper levels of business performance, right from the grassroots, the patients that you test and the drugs that you deliver, right the way through to the boardroom, and making sure that those decisions, those strategic business decisions, are made to impact wider society and beyond. And I know when it comes to trends and insights, and obviously we're seeing a lot happen in our global markets at present, what is your take on where the future of diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity is starting to head? Because I know we had a chat off the record before the podcast began, but I really do think, many believe, diversity starts and is most far ahead in the US. Do we think, from your perspective, this is true, or are there other factors at play here?
I think there are a lot of different factors at play. And I don't want to be presumptuous to say that it's better in the US than it is in Europe or Asia or Latin America, because I think each country, each region has challenges and successes that need to be overcome. And I say that because when you think about the historical perspective of the United States, with especially when it comes to race, it's different from the historical perspective of Europe in colonization and Asia Pacific and the LGBTQ community. And, all of these different aspects are so very, very important. And each of us faces different challenges. But I think when I think about the future of diversity, inclusion, and equity, there are a lot of trends. So coming out of this pandemic, there's been a lot of D and not a lot of I. And when I say D, I mean distancing. The countries were closing up borders. Travel was just non-existent. You had companies that were sending their employees home, and so they were virtually distanced from their coworkers. You had, on an individual basis, people social distancing and keeping 6 feet apart from each other when they dared venture outside of their homes. So there's been a lot of distancing. And so coming out of the pandemic, we have to really, really focus on inclusion. And not just in 2021, after everyone's been vaccinated, or 2022, but moving forward, because the lessons that we've learned during the course of this past year have been so profound. And if we don't learn from them and integrate them into our strategies moving forward, then we will definitely have lost out. I think that we need to make sure that we're focusing on inclusion. And then secondly, there are certain aspects around leadership skills. What made us successful 5-10 years ago, the average leader, we were good in what we did from a professional standpoint in our functional discipline. And so we were made leaders and managers. And in some areas, every leader that I talk with, every chief diversity and inclusion officer that I talk with, the challenges that we face tend to be in those first and second line managers. And so how do we make sure that we are providing support and resources to them, because they're not as equipped to be able to handle this dynamic workforce that we've seen just evolve over the past, especially 5 to 10 years. And now it has just exploded over the last year. So leadership skills and capabilities are going to need to be amplified and very important as we choose leaders in the future. So, inclusive behaviors, I talked about that, being able to make sure that you understand psychological safety. You remember years ago where, at least in the United States, they used to say, you don't talk about politics or religion in the workplace. That is definitely not something that can be done now. You have to be able to have an open door policy and be able to be equipped to be able to handle and have those bold, inclusive conversations. Because if we don't have those conversations that have different perspectives, if we don't have them, we'll never get to a point of inclusion. So I think leadership skills and capabilities is very important. We also have to be much more in tune to the communities that exist out there. What are some of the obstacles and the barriers that are getting in the way of people really being able to benefit from economic inclusion, economic impact? And each country needs to be aware of that. And so as chief diversity and inclusion officers, we have to have a competency in politics, political environment, social economic environment. We have to understand that and be able to make sure that we're trying to bridge the gap through the work that we do with our organizations, so no one gets left behind, whatever the customer base may be. That is just really, really important. In our space, technology, in Europe, telemedicine has just evolved, and especially during this pandemic, where people aren't necessarily going to the doctor's offices or the physician's offices, but they're doing the virtual telemedicine calls. And this has increased vastly, especially in Europe and the United States. And so we have to make sure, though, that we understand that in the patient base, there are many communities that they don't have computers or laptops or even iPhones. And so how are we reaching them? So we want to make sure that the technology is not causing a greater gap in the patient base and in the customer base in any technology. So that is something that's really important. But I just feel like, there are a lot of different trends, especially the employee awakening. This pandemic, with people working virtually at home, with 24-hour news channels running on their television or their iPads in the background, people are so attuned to what's happening in the world and in their communities that they represent. And so there's no separation of what's happening externally externally, and the workplace. And even when we eventually start, coming back to work, there is an employee awakening that is just, it has blown up, and especially over the last year. And it was a crescendo that was happening over the last 5 or so years, but it has really just blown up in this last year. And so we need to make sure that we're not stifling the viewpoints, the perspectives that our employees have, as long as, and this is really important, as long as it is aligned with the values and standards of the corporation that you happen to belong to. If the views are not aligned to the values and standards, then there might be an issue there. But as long as, if we assume that and assume good intent, that we need to be able to have these conversations, because employees are demanding it, our investors are demanding it, the shareholders are demanding it. And they're not just looking at the financial performance of the company. They're looking at the top line, the bottom line, but they're also looking at, well, what are the company's values and standards when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? I can't even tell you, Leila, how many investor calls that I've been involved in over the past 3 to 5 years, where they're asking these questions and I've been pulled in to answer them. It's just becoming more and more important. And so it further amplifies the need for companies to really make sure that they understand and have a stance around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think the last thing I'll say is the trend for corporations to play a role in social activism. There was a time when the CEO of Fortune 500 companies, they didn't necessarily speak out on social issues. And now you see more and more CEOs speaking up about Black Lives Matter, speaking up about Stop Asian Hate, speaking up about various different issues, because candidates that are looking for companies to join, especially in the Generation Y and Z, they're looking for companies that are aligned to their own individual values and standards. And so from a recruiting standpoint, from a war on talent, it becomes really important. And also, again, from an investor standpoint, the investors want to know not just the financial performance of the company, but they want to know what that company stands for when it comes to values and standards. Because we all know, and I tell our senior leaders this, we're one tweet away from our stock falling. It just takes one thing, and we've seen this, the impact of social media has on various different brands of various different companies. So it just becomes really, really important. I think those are some of the trends that corporations and D&I are facing moving forward.
My goodness, that was so inspirational. And I'm at risk of agreeing with everything that you are saying. So, Sadia, I'm just going to agree with everything that you are saying. Organizations cannot afford not to listen. I mean, that is a quote for a t-shirt, isn't it? We are one tweet away from our stock falling, with a hashtag on there as well, because it is true. And yes, I am going to sound a little bit biased here because I'm so passionate about diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity. But the role of the Chief Diversity Officer, or the CDO, which is not a commonly used term in the UK, albeit very well known over in the States within Fortune organizations. In the UK, we're looking at whether this will happen more and more, we hope, with FTSE organizations. But that is the most difficult and challenging role within the C-suite, because you're
very challenging.
Because you're influencing mile wide and mile deep, as you have demonstrated with everything that you have said there. This is about supply chain diversity. This is about the communities that we serve. This is about the technology. Do they have it? Do they not? Can we presume that everyone who is on the ground in these underprivileged communities, do they have iPhones? You're right, they may not have them. And then you're influencing government policy, external shareholders, stakeholders, you name it, they are there. Companies cannot afford not to take this seriously. And so why why do we not see more chief diversity officers or CDOs as a strategic priority in the C-suite, in the boardrooms of corporate America and corporate Britain and the world, frankly? What's really interesting, and I was thinking as you were saying it, you know, there's almost no grey lines in one respect, because there is this trend, there is this need for corporations and CEOs. We've seen a lot of wonderful CEOs standing up and speaking out. You know, silence is violence to a certain extent. If you're not going to say anything, well, we know where you stand and we're going to presume that. And people are going to say it anyway on social media. And so why not, in this world that we live in, where there is a relative amount in most countries of freedom of speech, to an extent, I should say, I'm generalizing a bit here, why would we not have our leaders who sit within those boardrooms, in those positions of power, say something and be advised by those that truly care and are truly passionate about driving this agenda forwards? And the other interesting thing, which I was just going to pick up on if you didn't mind, is this piece around employee awakening. That is so powerful, so powerful. And you're right, you know, it is blowing up. You know, gone are the days where, oh, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. Well, you kind of can't not. I mean, one thing that I was saying on an interview actually earlier this week was these old-fashioned expressions that we've heard for so many years, possibly growing up and in organizations, in our personal lives, is it's not business, it's personal. And I remember sitting there and thinking, hang on a minute, I've always thought, okay, so there's boundaries, there's business and then there's personal, but actually, where is the boundary now? Does one exist? And also when it comes to diversity and inclusion, belonging and equity, when you're so very passionate about it, it's very hard not to be incredibly emotionally attached to this. Oh, don't bring emotion to the boardroom, they may have said in the past. Well, why not? It's very difficult not to do that, really, isn't it? When you care so much about what it is that you do.
Well, it's absolutely true. And you're absolutely correct. It was, you know, there's lots of ploys to make sure that you're not thinking about diversity and inclusion. And that was one of the things, like, you know, don't be emotional. This is a business setting. And, you know, I've heard it all. And especially being a woman of color. But, you know, I think what I like to say, and I like to flip the switch to help people to understand, we hire people for their functional skills and their capabilities. You know, they're a good marketer, they're a good salesperson, they're a good scientist, they're a good engineer. And people, they feel valued because of that, you know, those skills and competencies, that's good. But what if we could really raise the bar when we talk about empowerment and engagement with employees? If we also ask them to bring their authentic selves to work and talk about their cultural experience and bring that aspect of themselves into work. And what I mean by that, if I'm on a marketing team within Merck and I am a Black woman and I come in and I'm a very good marketing person, I have my MBA, I have all my degrees and all of that, but I'm also able to not just bring those functional skills and capabilities, but I'm also able to bring the fact that, hey, this marketing strategy is not going to be successful in the Black urban community because 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I know that because I come from that community and I know what's going on in my community. And so if you want this marketing strategy to be successful in my community, where we have a certain percentage of our patients, then we need to change this, and this. How empowered and valued would I feel if I'm able to not just bring my functional skills and capabilities, but I'm able to talk about my cultural experience and my community and my background and integrate it into what I do, to bring value to the organization. You talk about someone being engaged and empowered and energized. That is the number one place where you want your employees to be. And so from the standpoint of business leaders or CEOs who haven't felt the need to hire a chief diversity or inclusion officer, then they need to understand that it goes beyond the moral compass of the organization. It goes beyond that you want your employee base to feel empowered and energized. It goes beyond the fact that there are new leadership skills and capabilities that are needed. It goes beyond your shareholders are going to be demanding it. Your candidates in the labor market are going to be demanding it. But all of those different things, why would you not want to have this as an integral part of your strategy as a business? And if you don't see that, then you're not seeing the long-term strategic benefits of exploring this area, because it is so important, especially when you think about this generation, the millennial generation, Generation Z. It is globally, those are the two most diverse generations that we have ever seen. And so, we were talking earlier about all the different aspects of culturalism and all the different perspectives. This generation that is in the workforce and the one coming, we have to be prepared. We have to be prepared. And if we're not prepared, they're not going to be coming to your organization. And I don't care, how much money, how much, what your brand is. If they don't feel that you have the same values and standards that they do, they will not come to your organization. We know this from the research and the focus groups with this generation. So there are so many different reasons. And when you take the pros and the cons and you line them all up, the pros immensely outweighs the cons for not having this position in your organization.
Well, I couldn't say it any better myself without repeating verbatim what you have said there, Celeste. Wow, you are a force. I love it. Empowerment, recognition, energy. As a millennial leader myself, I would never dream of going to work for an organization that didn't make me feel like they care. And it's so very easy to see whether that is the truth. An organization's website versus scratching below the surface, it doesn't take a very long time to really look at, understand, hear the voices of the people that drive forward that organization. And so it is really such an honor to be talking with you today. And you have a very, very lucky organization to have you at the helm. I'm so very grateful for you joining today. And I always give a little summary at the end, and I'm kind of like, where do I start to give a summary on all of the rich information today? But what I will say to those listening in, I know that you'll have been inspired and motivated and educated by not only the discussion, the rich discussion around the global trends, the idiosyncratic detail that lies culturally within the diversity of what is happening within the organization, the intersectional viewpoints from race, ethnicity, culture, socioeconomic background, the generations in the workforce. We've covered the war on talent, which I think means something very, very different now to the world of diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, to what it did do. Leaders and organizations, listen up. You cannot afford not to take this seriously. It's as simple as mathematics, lining up the pros and cons, as Celeste has said. This is about feeling now. The leaders of the future are about emotional intelligence. And that is a rare commodity, This is about looking at people not as things, but as real, living, breathing organisms that drive forward as assets to your organization, really taking a good hard look at the values and the standards. How empowered and capable do we feel? I will leave you with that question. But what a brilliant show it has been today with Celeste. Before we wrap up and say goodbye, I would absolutely encourage you all to follow Celeste. You can check her out on Twitter. Her handle is at CRW Diversity. She's on LinkedIn as well. But also, if you've missed anything from the podcast, you can rewind, repeat, listen, and watch on demand to your heart's content. You can also visit us, in addition, online in the Dial Global app, Dial Global Network in the App Store. And we'll also be putting all of the show notes and the key learning points from today's episode into the show notes at the end of the day's show. If you need any support in listening or watching, we have a team who is happy to support for which and whatever your requirements may be in terms of accessibility. And of course, if you've been affected by anything at all from today's show, please don't be a stranger. Make sure you reach out and let us know. Celeste, thank you so much. You've been an absolute superstar.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much, Celeste. My name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis. I'm the founder and CEO of Dial Global. You've been listening to the fabulous Celeste Warren today, Vice President of Global Diversity, Centre of Excellence at Merck. Take care. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. You can visit us at www.dialglobal.org/podcast. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.